She found an old photograph in the dusty attic, its wooden frame worn smooth by time. Inside, 4 men stood straight, their solemn eyes fixed on the camera. But when she compared it with family records and the town's history, only 3 names were ever mentioned. The 4th had vanished completely, as if he had never existed. Who had erased him from the collective memory, and for what reason? A legacy could be honor, or it could be silence. Yet sometimes, silence itself is the heaviest burden of all. Part 1. She set the photograph on the old wooden table in the living room, where the afternoon light streamed through dusty windows in pale golden streaks. The 4 faces stared back at her, silent, unmoving, like witnesses to a story cut short. She recognized the 3 on the left instantly. They were the ancestors spoken of hundreds of times in family records and local history books, the founders of the town, their names etched into the memorial stone in the square. But the man standing at the far right was different. His gaze was sharp, almost defiant, yet in all the documents she had found, his name was absent. She opened the thick family genealogy book. Every page was filled with neat lines describing each generation's lives, accomplishments, and struggles. However, only 3 men were noted regarding the entry about that commemorative photograph. The 4th was left blank, as though he had been erased from the story. That silence caught in her throat. Her family had always been proud of their origins, reciting shining tales of resilience and hardship overcome. Yet never, not once, had anyone mentioned the shadow of the man in that picture. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of the stranger kept replaying in her mind, his upright posture, his hand clenched as if gripping a vow. She opened her laptop and logged into the town's digitized archives. Old newspapers, council minutes, and even faded advertisements contained the 3 familiar names. But him, nothing. That emptiness carried the weight of concealment. In history, there are rarely such perfect blank spaces. If he were only an outsider, why would he be posed alongside the others in such a formal photograph? Why had his name been scrubbed so thoroughly if he were merely incidental? The next morning, she brought the photo to her father. The silver-haired man frowned, shook his head, and snapped, "Don't dig up the past. Some things are forgotten for a reason." His words thickened the air in the room. She had never seen her father avoid a question like this, and that avoidance, rather than extinguishing her curiosity, only fueled her resolve. She returned to the attic, rummaging through every old chest. Amid brittle letters, she discovered an unmarked envelope, sealed only with a faded ink stamp. "Keep it quiet." Inside was half a newspaper clipping, reporting on the town's founding ceremony. The photograph was reprinted, but strangely, this version showed only 3 men. The 4th had been cut away. She gripped the paper tightly, heart racing. This was no forgetting, this was deliberate. Who had cut him out of history? And why had an entire town kept silent together? One question echoed in her chest, relentless. If legacy is truth, then what had her family really passed down, except silence? 2 days later, she drove to the small archive building in the town center. Outside, the stone steps were blotched with green moss, as if holding the breath of more than a century. Inside, the air was dry and cold, thick with the smell of old paper and rotting wood. The elderly archivist looked up as she entered, her smile polite but her eyes wary when she heard the request for documents from the town's founding years. The woman led her into a narrow room where tall filing cabinets loomed like walls. "Here you'll find copies of all public records," she said, then left. The door closed behind her, sealing the silence. She began opening drawers, pulling out yellowed folders, meeting minutes, land deeds, photographs reprinted from old film. The three familiar names appeared everywhere: William Carter, Henry Dalton, and Samuel Reeves. But strangely, in some records, there was a blank space after Samuel Reeves's name, as if a fourth entry had been erased. Her pulse quickened. She turned to another file, which was a land division report. A section had been heavily blacked out, the ink bleeding thick across the page. Tilting it under the lamp, faint words shimmered through. Did not agree, and warned against. A chill raced down her spine. Someone had opposed, someone had warned, and it might well have been the man from the photograph. Still searching, she pulled out a wooden box mislabeled with the wrong date. Inside were stacks of newspapers that had never been digitized. One folded issue slipped to the floor. On the front page was the familiar photograph of four men, but a pencil mark circled the fourth face, with 3 words scrawled in the margin: "Don't trust him." She inhaled sharply, caught between fear and fascination. This wasn't accidental forgetting. This was a battle of wills. A man who had dared to stand apart, and paid by being erased from plaques, books, and memory. She carried the paper to the work desk, snapping a photo with her phone. When she looked up, the archivist stood there watching her intently. The smile was gone. Her voice was low but firm. Some things people let go of for a reason. Don't stir them back up, girl. The words dropped in the dim room like cold iron. Emma shivered. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just family business. This was a truth locked away, and the entire town had chosen silence. She stepped out into the late afternoon. The wind cut sharply across the square. The photograph in her coat pocket felt like a live ember. One question surged inside her. If the fourth man once said no to injustice, did she have the courage to carry that word forward after more than a century? The next day, she went to the nursing home on the edge of town. There, among long hallways heavy with the smell of disinfectant and the squeak of nurses rolling carts, lived an old man people said had lived long enough to know what no one dared to tell his name was Walter, over 90 years old, with eyes still strangely bright beneath his white brows. She handed him the photograph. His trembling hand touched the dusty glass. His aged eyes widened suddenly, then closed again, as if swallowing a memory too heavy to name. "These 3 everyone knows," he rasped, his finger brushing the familiar faces individually. "Carter, Dalton, Reeves, they have statues, they're in the books. But the last one..." He stopped. His finger froze on the fourth face. A heavy silence filled the small room. Finally, he sighed. He didn't vanish. He was forced into silence. She stiffened. "What do you mean?" Walter sat up straighter, his voice suddenly sharper, like years of slumbering truth had been jolted awake. "Back then I was just a boy, but my father told me repeatedly, one man among the founders would not bow his head. He opposed taking land from poor farmers, opposed striking deals with the government for profit. He spoke out loud, spoke straight, and then, one morning, he was gone. No one dared ask. No one dared write it down. The town chose silence together." The room seemed to grow colder. She swallowed hard and whispered, "What was his name?" Walter looked at her for a long time, his gaze cutting through the dust of decades. "My father used to say it, but every time he did, he shook his head and warned me, 'Don't speak it. They won't forgive anyone who remembers.' So I learned silence, just as this whole town learned silence." She clutched the photograph, her heart pounding. This silence wasn't accidental forgetting. It was collective complicity. By the time she left the nursing home, night had fallen. Weak yellow streetlights spilled across cracked sidewalks, stretching her shadow long. Walter's voice still echoed in her ears. He was forced into silence. At the corner, the wind rattled the frame inside her bag, making a dull knocking sound like a ghostly reminder. She realized then that this photograph was more than evidence. It was a cry for help, stifled for over 100 years. If an entire town had chosen silence, could she dare to break that taboo? She returned to her ancestral home on a rainy morning. On the attic roof, rain drummed steadily, and the smell of damp mildew spread through the room. She began digging through unopened chests, thick with dust and cobwebs. Amid a heap of old books, she uncovered a small tin box, its lock rusted, its lid stuck. With some effort, she forced the hinge open. Inside lay a stack of yellowed papers, slanted handwriting scrawled across them, signed with a surname that had never appeared in the family records. Matthew Cole. Her heart pounded. At last, the fourth man had a name. Hands trembling, she opened the first pages. His voice rang out in each line, urgent and unyielding. They want to divide the land of the poor, to disguise theft as pioneering, I objected. I said, this is not justice, this is robbery. They laughed. They called me naive. But I know silence is betrayal, and I will not be silent. Rain hammered the window, beating like punctuation on each word. The following page was written in a rushed hand. Tonight, Carter and Dalton came to see me. They urged me to back down, to take a small parcel of land and keep quiet. They said if I kept resisting, I'd only bring trouble on myself. Reeves stood behind them, saying nothing, only bowing his head. I looked at them and knew I had lost 3 friends, and perhaps my own safety as well. Her throat tightened as she read. This man had chosen truth, which had cast him out of history. On the final page, the ink was blurred from water stains. If one day someone finds these words, tell my son that his father did not betray. I kept my vow, to never be silent in the face of injustice. And if history names only 3 men, let him remember. Outside the frame, there was another face. She dropped the page, eyes burning with tears. All this time, the town had celebrated 3 names as symbols of honor, while the truth had been buried under her very roof. Outside, the rain eased. Pale light filtered through the window, falling across the stack of papers. The words seemed to glow, demanding to be heard after more than a century of silence. She understood then. She was no longer standing in a family story. This was the story of an entire community, and it was her responsibility to bring that voice back. Yet fear stirred in her chest. If Matthew Cole had once been forced into silence, would the truth be accepted now? Late at night, the wind howled through rattling window frames. Emma returned to the attic, her flashlight sweeping across the dusty shelves. She couldn't rest easy with what she had already posted. Something told her more was hidden here, something that could end all arguments once and for all. She heard a hollow thump as she cleared a corner of the floor. Kneeling, she pried at the boards with a crowbar and pulled out an old wooden box sealed with cracked red wax. Her hands trembling, she opened it. Inside was a thick bundle of papers, their edges yellowed, but the official government seals still visible. Emma opened the first page, a land survey map from 1889. Red ink marked the divided lots. In the corner, a handwritten note. Bribe $500. Keep quiet. Her heart pounded. This wasn't a private journal anymore. This was legal evidence, irrefutable. She flipped further. A short contract, signed by Carter, Dalton, and Reeves, but no Matthew Cole. In the margin, a hurried scrawl. Refused to sign. Considered a traitor, the room was, utterly still. The only sound, her own heartbeat. Suddenly, the back door slammed open. A gust of cold wind swept in, scattering papers from her hands. Emma lunged to grab them, but a clean white sheet fell. Bold black letters shouted across the page, "Stop, or you will pay the price!" She froze, chilled to the bone. Someone had just been there. Glass shattered behind her. Shards clattered across the floor. Emma spun around, but only caught a glimpse of a dark figure slipping past the porch, swallowed by night. Her hands shook as she clutched the evidence tighter. There was no doubt now. Matthew Cole's secret wasn't just buried in books. Someone, flesh and blood, still wanted her silent and was willing to threaten her to ensure it. Emma drew a deep breath, chest tight. She knew 3 possibilities lay ahead. If she went public, she would face her father, who might have known the truth. The town council could sue her for defaming its heritage. Or worse, the intruder could return, and next time, it might not just be a stone through the window. The cold wind howled through the broken pane, rattling the photograph of 4 faces on the table. Emma stared straight at the 4th man, whispering, "They forced you into silence. But I won't." In that dark house, she realized with finality, there was no turning back. News of her discovery spread quickly through the family. Some relatives grew angry, accusing her of digging up dirt and staining the ancestors' honor. One evening at dinner, an uncle snapped, "Matthew Cole was a traitor." This whole town agreed on that long ago. Don't you dare undo it. Emma didn't answer. She simply laid Matthew's final letter on the table. All eyes fell on the yellowed page where shaky handwriting declared, "I did not betray what is right. I chose the truth, and for that, I must pay." The room fell silent. The rumor repeated for generations that he had betrayed his friends and fled in cowardice was shattered instantly. Days later, she carried the iron box to the city hall. The council chamber, usually reserved for dull routines, was tense. On the table lay Matthew's journals and his last letter. As Emma read each line aloud, the air grew heavier. They wanted to seize land from the poor. I opposed. I knew silence was betrayal, and I would not be silent. A murmur rippled through the back rows. An elderly man stood, trembling. My father told me about him, but always warned me never to say a word. Now I understand why. In that moment, the chamber was no longer a place of denial. It had become a quiet courtroom. And the evidence was clear. Matthew was no traitor. He was the only one who dared to say no to injustice. Word spread through town. Some reacted with fury, fearful of losing the image of the 3 perfect founders. But younger voices amplified Emma's story on social media, calling Matthew the forgotten hero. One afternoon, Emma stood in the square beneath the bronze statue of 3 men, tall on their pedestal. She raised the photograph of 4 faces. People gathered around, staring at the 4th man, Matthew Cole, the face cut out of every official version. A frail woman whispered, "He was the only one who truly deserved to be called a founder." The words landed like a hammer blow, cracking the silence that had sealed the town for over a century. The legend was overturned. The 3 men had built the town on stolen land, while Matthew Cole, erased from memory, had chosen honesty and courage, and was buried for it. Emma felt it deep in her bones. From this day on, the town's history could never be told the same way again. Her responsibility was to restore his name so that legacy would no longer mean silence, but the light of courage. That evening, the town square was packed with people. Streetlights cast their glow down on the towering statue of the three founders. The air was heavy, and everyone awaited what would unfold. She stepped onto a small wooden platform, clutching the photograph of four faces. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she read the words from Matthew Cole's unsent letter aloud. "If I do not return, please remember, I was not silent. I chose the truth, even when the truth cost me everything." The words echoed through the night. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and many faces blurred with tears. A young man shouted, "We built the statue for the wrong men." The one with true courage was buried for over a century. The air broke open. Some protested, fearful that revealing the truth would shame the town. But more voices rose, demanding justice for Matthew. For the first time, the collective silence was shattered. She held the photograph high. "This is the truth. Not three, but four. And this fourth face deserves to be seen, not erased." Thunderous applause erupted. A few people laid flowers at the statue's base, as if saving a place for the missing name. An elderly man, trembling, spoke. "My father warned me never to mention him. Tonight, I want to apologize for that silence." In that moment, she felt as if the whole town breathed in unison, the breath of truth, the release after carrying a century of weight. After a heated debate, the town council finally agreed to erect a new plaque beside the monument. It bore four names, including Matthew Cole. The carved letters gleamed in the lamplight when the cloth was pulled away. A wave of applause surged through the square. Many people wept openly. She stood still, tears running down her face, but inside she felt lighter than ever. All the pain, doubt, and fear melted away in that instant. She was no longer the lone woman battling silence. An entire community had chosen to speak the truth with her. Catharsis, release, had come, not from treasure, but from the courage to restore a name to history. Months after the candlelight vigil, the town square looked different. Beside the old monument, the new, stone plaque gleamed in the morning sun, etched with four names. Passers-by often stopped, laying flowers or brushing their hands over the words Matthew Cole, as if whispering a belated apology. Her ancestral home had changed too. The attic was no longer a place of dust and shadows. It was a small exhibit where visitors could see photographs of four faces, read Matthew's journals, and hold his final letter. Schools brought students there, teaching children that truth can be hidden, but courage is a flame that never dies. One afternoon, as she stood in that room, a 10-year-old girl tugged at her sleeve, eyes shining. "Miss?" she asked. "Was Matthew afraid when he told the truth?" She smiled gently, bending down. Of course he was. But courage isn't about not being afraid. Courage is doing what's right even when you are afraid. The girl nodded solemnly, then ran off to tell her friends. Warmth swelled in Emma's chest. Her father, who had once dismissed the shadow of Matthew, now often sat on the porch, quietly reading new articles praising him as a forgotten hero. One evening, he took her hand, eyes wet. "You did what I never could. I'm proud of you." In the soft breeze, she felt like someone whispered, "Thank you." Perhaps it was Matthew. Perhaps it was only her own heart echoing. On the town's anniversary, a solemn ceremony was held at dawn. This time, not just 3 faces were named, but 4. The speaker's voice rang clear. It is not silence, but truth. That is the greatest legacy. Church bells tolled across the valley, their sound rolling like a cleansing wave. The townspeople no longer bowed their heads in shame, but lifted them high to embrace the truth. That night, she returned to the attic. The photograph of 4 faces hung straight on the wall. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing each face in soft glow. No darkness pressed down anymore, only peace. She whispered, "Silence is not the legacy we inherit. Truth is, and we will never let it be erased again." Then she closed the door, her heart unburdened. An old chapter had ended. A new one had begun. The chapter of honesty, courage, and healing.